Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. The Battle of Firfell. In the 164th year of the Common Reckoning, Scalfin, the war earl of the Eastland, and Gudric, the husband of Ingelfrid, the mine lady of Silvermere, led an army over the river Ravenshead, marching into the dark hills, making war upon Ulfkill, the crown prince of those lands. Although Ulfkill had not expected to be attacked in his homeland, he was not unprepared for war. He was himself assembling an army, with the intention of marching it into the Eastland, and had some 600 dwarves under his command. Half of them bore spears and shields, and the others were equipped with crossbows. When news of Scalfin and Gudric's incursion reached him, he rapidly put his forces into battle order, dividing them into 4 companies, each consisting of a mixture of spear dwarves and crossbow dwarves, and led them into the field. All were warriors by trade, well trained and armoured. By contrast, the forces under Scalfin's command were untested, untrained, and mostly unarmoured, being levy troops newly mustered from the Eastland. They included 250 crossbow dwarves and another 250 dwarves armed with a motley assortment of melee weapons. Only the troops under Gudric's command were of high quality, 150 grim-faced, mail-clad, shield-bearing spear dwarves from Silvermere. Scalfin divided his levy troops between the crossbow dwarves and the rest. He placed the crossbow dwarves at the head of his force, split into 2 companies. Behind them marched the well-ordered ranks of Gudric's spear dwarves. Scalfin and the rest of the levy troops brought up the rear. Deep in the heart of the dark hills reared the brooding height of Firfell, the monotony of its bleak flanks broken only by an occasional thicket of evergreen trees. It was here that the 2 forces met. As Scalfin and Gudric's footsore force traversed the slopes of the great hill, the crossbow dwarves in the van sighted Ulfkill's army in a valley below, marching in column toward them. Scalfin ordered the crossbow dwarves to bear to their left, to take up position in a small wood overlooking the head of the valley which Ulfkill was ascending. To the right of the crossbow dwarves, Gudric and his spear dwarves also pressed on, keen to close with their foes. Scalfin attempted to lead the levy troops in the rear up in support of Gudric. About half of them followed him forward. The remainder milled around confusedly, reluctant to advance. Ulfkill attempted no such complicated manoeuvres. Without breaking step, his troops continued to march up the valley in their well-ordered column. The leading group of Eastlander levy crossbow dwarves had now taken up position in the wood to which they had been directed. The second group of crossbow dwarves moved up behind them. To their right, Gudric's spear dwarves advanced down the slope, supported by Scalfin and his miscellaneously equipped contingent. The remaining Eastlander levy troops still loitered in the rear. Ulfkill sent his leading company of dwarves off to his left, instructing them to pass behind a thicket at the head of the valley and confront Gudric and his spear dwarves. He led his second company forward to face off against the Eastlander crossbow dwarves in the trees on the slopes above. There was an exchange of crossbow bolts, which caused a few casualties among the Eastlanders, but drove Ulfkill's crossbow dwarves back in disarray. Even as the front ranks of Ulfkill's force reeled backward, the companies in the rear were advancing into the fray. Officers shouted orders, staying the retreat. Chastened crossbow dwarves were reinforced with new arrivals and hurried forward once more, reforming the broken lines. Meanwhile, contingents of spear dwarves were sent to reinforce Ulfkill's left flank. The Eastlanders were also bringing up reinforcements. The second company of Eastlander crossbow dwarves had now formed a line to the left of their colleagues in the wood. Once more the opposed line of dwarves loosed crossbow bolts at each other. But this time the Eastlanders had the worst of it, suffering heavy losses. On the other side of the battlefield, Ulfkill's dwarves hastily arranged themselves into a ragged line to meet Gudrick and his spear dwarves, who continued to advance down the hill. Behind Gudrick came Scalfin, and behind Scalfin came the recalcitrant levies at the rear of the host, who had finally formed up into some semblance of order, and were moving forward. Now the two lines of spear dwarves came together. Shields clashed, spears stabbed, mail was rent, and blood flowed. Back and forth the battle lines swayed. But, little by little, it was Ulfkill's spear dwarves who were gaining ground. Inch by painful inch, Gudrick's line was pushed back, until the strain was too much to bear, and Ulfkill's spear dwarves broke through the shield wall. Gudrick's troops were well drilled and disciplined. They did not panic. Those who could reformed themselves, forming a hedgehog of spears around their leader. Scalfin and his troops were coming up behind them. If they could only hold on until he arrived, the tide of battle would surely turn. Scalfin did not let them down. The first wave of Eastland levy troops charged into the melee, but they did not have the desired effect. Ulfkill's spear dwarfs stood firm, stopping Scalfin's troops in their tracks, and then slowly driving them back. On the hill above the swirling melee, the second group of Eastland militia surveyed the situation. Below them, Scalfin and Gudrick were being hard pressed by Ulfkill's spear dwarves. On the Eastlanders' left flank, Ulfkill's force at the head of the valley was directing volley after volley of well-aimed bolts into the Eastland crossbow dwarves with devastating effect. Indeed, the complete collapse of the Eastlanders' left seemed to be imminent. That would allow Ulfkill to throw his victorious right flank into the combat on his left, and that would surely be the end of Gudrick and Scalfin and any dwarves rash enough to fight alongside them. The Eastlander levies on the hillside considered these matters, and then they turned and marched back the way that they had come. With a great cry, the spear dwarves of the Dark Hills surged forward once more. Gudrick's line was overwhelmed, the shield wall broken. Gudrick himself fell, fighting bravely but hopelessly outnumbered, run through by many spears. Staggering under the onslaught, Scalfin and his levies started to fall back, unable to hold. But Gudrick's surviving spear dwarves were made of sterner stuff. They had taken Gudrick's gold and pledged loyalty to him. Honour now demanded that they fulfil that promise by dying in defence of his corpse. Standing over his body, outnumbered and surrounded by their foes, they fought on. Distracted by this act of desperate defiance, the dwarves of the Dark Hills did not press their pursuit of Scalfin's levies. Had they done so, a disorderly retreat would probably have turned into a chaotic rout, with much slaughter. As it was, Scalfin and those around him were able to withdraw from the field without suffering any further losses. They were joined by the very few remaining Eastlander crossbow dwarves. And so it was that, as the last few of Gudrick's spear dwarves died defiantly on their feet, fighting to the last, the remnants of Scalfin's defeated army raggedly fled over the slopes of the great hill. Thus ended the Battle of Firfell.